Hey there, I'm Chris Hassel from CBS Sports, and the college basketball season tips off on Tuesday night. So we are beginning the road to the Final Four, and things seem a lot more wide open than they did at this time last season. We have the best minds from CBSSports.com with us to preview the upcoming season. Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander from the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Fellas, Michigan State preseason #1 for the first time ever. Duke doesn't receive a single first-place vote. And the most interesting team in the nation, according to Gary, is a team from the American Conference. Gary, tell us about Penny Hardaway's Tigers.
It's such a unique situation. We're talking about a second-year coach in Penny Hardaway who has enrolled the #1 recruiting class in America, headlined by the #1 prospect in America, and the guy who most believe is going to be the top pick of the 2020 NBA draft, that is James Wiseman. And so it really is a rare situation for a coach so inexperienced to get a recruiting class like this and for him to enroll it at a school that is sitting outside of the traditional power structure. The American is still a power conference by definition, but we don't have to lie to each other. It's not the ACC. It's not the Big Ten. And so opinions on this team are all over the place. Some have them preseason top 10. Some have them outside of the top 20. But either way, fascinating, interesting, undeniable. This Memphis team is going to be a big story all year for one reason or another. If they're great, it'll be a topic we discuss nonstop. If they're not great, it might even be a bigger topic.
Hey, you mentioned that most humans have them in the top 10 or top 15, but Matt, Ken Pom has Memphis 50th. Man versus machine. Who's going to be more accurate come March?
Man here, because Memphis at 50 is also not a glitch with Pomeroy's algorithm, but he has told Gary on his very radio show in Memphis that the amount of freshmen that have been inherited by this program, the Pomeroy algorithm doesn't really take into account how good or great they could be, because historically teams with freshmen that are so reliant on freshmen are a little bit more unpredictable. But I will say there have been two teams, and I'm not saying Memphis will win the national title, but there have been two teams that have been exceedingly reliant on freshmen in recent seasons, 2012 Kentucky and 2015 Duke, that did win it all. But 50th or 5th, I would lean closer to the latter. I think that Memphis has a really strong shot at finishing top 15, top 20 in the nation. But for me, it'll be intriguing to see how this program with that coach who wants all the smoke, Penny Hardaway, is proving to be a great on-the-record quote here for our business. He is not running from any kind of expectation. I think they will be good. I'm not convinced they'll be great, but I would be stunned, truly stunned, if Memphis is not a top 5 seed or better come NCAA tournament time. And obviously it hasn't been since John Calipari was there that they were expected to be this good.
Number 14 to begin the season. Their first big game is against number 15 Oregon. The #1 team in the land, the Michigan State Spartans, first time in school history that they're a preseason #1, Gary. How far is the gap, if it is very wide at all, between the Spartans and everybody else?
Yeah, not very far at all, and perhaps non-existent. I mean, Michigan State is obviously great on paper. You know, they won 32 times last season. Big Ten regular season champs, Big Ten tournament champs. They went to the Final Four, and 3 of the top 4 scorers from that team are back. But there is preseason news here to note, and that is that Joshua Langford is still dealing with a foot injury and is going to be out for a while and possibly the entire season. We couldn't know for sure, and so that's obviously not ideal. I know not everybody is the biggest fan of Josh Langford, and they were good without him last season, but when he played, he averaged 15 points a game. Trust me when I tell you, Tom Izzo would like to have him. So yes, Michigan State should be #1 in the preseason. Anybody voting otherwise is just trying to get cute, but I don't know that the gap is that big between Michigan State and Kansas, or Michigan State and Duke, or Michigan State and Kentucky, or Michigan State and Louisville. Just because they are the preseason #1 doesn't mean they are the obvious choice and guaranteed to win the national championship. This isn't a team locked and loaded with NBA prospects the way Duke was last year, the way Kentucky is most years. It's a team that has got a bunch of very good college basketball players, but they're limited in ways, undeniably.
I think the gap is noticeable only in that Michigan State is as overwhelming of a preseason #1 as I can remember in the past 7 or 8 seasons. And we've had some seasons recently where there was an ideal preseason pick. Kansas a season ago, not a consensus, but a pretty strong notion that the Jayhawks would be the best team in college basketball. And then Kansas went on to have the second worst season ever under Bill Self. So with Michigan State, I don't think we can overstate how impressive they set up to be. Now, I can't wait for Tuesday night to just get to these games and see what they're able to provide without Josh Langford. But it all starts with Cassius Winston, who, if you are a diehard traditionalist college basketball fan, like this, Michigan State and Cassius Winston is your team. He is the prototypical throwback four-year player, gets noticeably better every single season, and then by the time he's a senior, he's playing for a national title contender and is also regarded as the best player in the sport. Also could become, how about this? There's never been a 2,000-point, 1,000-assist player in the history of college basketball. Winston has a chance to do it if he can remain healthy, and you see those averages on the screen. If he can keep those averages and Michigan State can get deep into the tournament, he'll become the first player in the history of the sport to score at least 2,000 points in his career and dish 1,000 assists. That's pretty cool.
Cannot wait for Tuesday night, Madison Square Garden. Number 1 Michigan State against number 2 Kentucky, and number 4 Duke against number 3 Kansas. Let's talk about the Duke Blue Devils, Matt, because they're entering the post-Zion era. I know he was only there for a year, but it seemed like he was there for a long time. They lost 3 top 10 draft picks. Can Trey Jones lead this team to the Final Four?
No. Trey Jones is going to be a good leader. I think he'll be a really fun player to track. Now, Trey Jones' big knock, the reason why he is still at Duke is he does not have a jump shot. I promise you, if Trey Jones was able to prove to NBA scouts that he could hit an 18-footer or step back and hit a 3 with any sort of consistency, he would not be playing at Duke right now. He would have done what his brother did after winning the national title in 2015 and gone one and done off to the NBA. But be that as it may, he does return and has the chance to be a top 5 on-ball defender in college basketball, which is great. I think he'll be a great leader, but with the pieces that surround him, and if he's going to be asked to be a consistent scorer and provide not 9.4 points a game like last season when he had a lot of talent around him, but try and up that to the 14, 15, 16 point a game mark, the question becomes efficiency. The question becomes how much they're going to ask him to score and shoot. And if they don't do that, do they have enough talent in the freshman class, which is not nearly as good in my opinion as last year's class, to score around him? So Duke is obviously still almost certainly going to be a really good team. GP and I just disagree on how good they will be. To me, they are not top class in the ACC, and I don't view them as a viable Final Four contender along the likes of 7, 8, 9 other teams in the sport.
As Matt noted, I would respectfully disagree with my friend. Of course, Trey Jones can lead Duke to the Final Four. Somebody not as good as Trey Jones led a program not as good as Duke, Loyola Chicago, to the Final Four just a couple of years ago. But Matt is correct. Trey Jones is flawed. He's an incredible perimeter defender, but he does not have a jump shot, and that is a concern. And Mike Krzyzewski is already on record this season. I mean, we haven't even started things yet, and he's already on record saying we're not going to be a good shooting team. So he's not even trying to trick anybody, but they were great last season without being a good shooting team. They ranked in three-point percentage outside of the top 300 in the country. And no, Zion Williamson is not on this roster. Neither is RJ Barrett, neither is Cam Reddish. But Duke probably has 4 projected first-round draft picks. I don't know that any of them would go in the top 10, but Matthew Hurt was especially impressive in a weekend exhibition. He had 17 points. He's a stretch 4, if there ever were one, to enter college basketball. I like this team. They do not have the star power that they had last season, but if they're not really, really, really good again, that'll be a surprise to me.
And again, they're going to be playing Kansas to open up the season at Madison Square Garden. And Gary, Kansas had the second most first-place votes. They had 3 first-place votes. It seems like the only reason we talk about Kansas anymore is to talk about what might be coming down the road. But for this season, no sanctions. Are they a legit title contender?
Yes, and they're not built like most legitimate title contenders, but I don't know who is. I mean, the preseason number 1 team in the country, Michigan State, might not have a first-round draft pick on its roster. That's not normal. Kansas, similarly, might not have a first-round draft pick on its roster, but they've got a lot of really good college basketball players. And yes, a coach who is embattled in controversy, but still a Hall of Fame coach in Bill Self. And I really think you nailed it. when discussing Kansas these days, it's all about Adidas basketball and possible sanctions and maybe even Snoop Dogg bringing dancers to Allen Fieldhouse. But when you strip all that away and just focus on the basketball team that's going to be playing inside Allen Fieldhouse, they're good enough to win a Big 12 title. They're good enough to go to a Final Four, and absolutely they're good enough to win a national championship. And if we're trying to discuss what the best stories in college basketball, and maybe not best by some people's standards, but certainly most interesting, yeah, Tom Izzo getting his second national title 20 years after he got his first. Maybe you can put that right at the top. But Kansas, under all of these clouds, winning a national championship sure would be something.
It would be something, and I do expect Kansas to thrive this season. Bill Self has already said that he is, I mean, I don't know how you measure this kind of thing, guys, but he said, I'm going to coach this team harder than I've ever coached any team ever. Good to know, because Kansas has been freakishly dominant for the majority of Self's tenure at KU. The reason why you should be high on Kansas and the reason why the odds you're looking at are so good on the Jayhawks is that they have 2 of the 15 best players in college basketball, and they could easily prove to have the best outside-in combination. And point guard Devon Dotson, a sophomore, might be the fastest player with the ball in his hands in the sport. And then Udoka Azubuike, who's got issues shooting foul shots, but otherwise is a dominant, kind of old school, tough, low post big man. And it's just not those two, but that is something that's unusual in the sport this season, to have 2 guys who are fighting. They were the only, Kansas was the only school that had 2 players on our preseason All-American teams. So obviously that's an uncommon thing there. So keep an eye on the Jayhawks, because I think they're set up to be really strong defensively. They should be able to score, and they get Ochai Agbaji back. Remember, Silvio De Sousa won his appeal. He was not supposed to play this year. The NCAA ruled. Then Kansas fought that. They won that battle. They'll need him down low. So super intriguing team. And after failing to win the Big 12 last season, I think Kansas will win the league by at least 2 games.
Okay, let's get some picks now. We've got the top 4 teams in the AP poll meeting on Tuesday night, at least 2 games. It's not a tournament per se, but all 4 teams will be in action, played against one another. How much different is the actual Final Four going to look, Matt?
Well, I don't think it will be these 4 teams. That would be incredible, and actually that would be unprecedented. We've never actually seen a Final Four come full circle and match with games between opponents on opening night in the history of the sport here. But I do like Michigan State to get there. I do like Kentucky to get there, and I do like Kansas to get there. Kansas and Kentucky because of their defense. Michigan State will be a great offensive team. I think Florida will be the other team that I'm going to squeak in there because I like the athlete. Florida's got a great balance in terms of really talented 5-star freshmen coming in, strong veteran presence, good guard play, good wings, good men down low. So they're kind of the wild card, if you will, but I will take Michigan State. It's hard for me not to. If Josh Langford's going to be healthy, Chris and GP, I'm going to take Michigan State to win the national title. I know that's an obvious pick, but as we sit here right now, I cannot talk myself out of Michigan State winning and putting any other team there, because when at their full strength, I think Michigan State clearly sets up to be the best team in the sport. And I'll remind viewers, of course, this team is also the only one listed coming off a Final Four appearance from last season.
Matt's exactly right. You know, the top 4 teams in the preseason AP poll or any other poll never actually end up in the Final Four. And, you know, history shows that even when we get to March and we think after an extended period of months and games played, and we think we have a good grasp for who the best teams are, those teams don't usually all make the Final Four. Evidence being that only one year, and this was 2008, did all 4 number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament actually advance all the way to the Final Four. And yet, just from a logical perspective, I always, in the preseason, predict the Final Four to be the top 4 teams I have in the top 25-1, because if I thought somebody else was a better option to get there, I should have them in the top 4. So I'll go Michigan State, Kentucky, Duke, and Louisville as my Final Four. And yes, like Matt, I've got Michigan State winning the national championship. They're so good at so many different spots. They're experienced. They've got a Hall of Fame coach. The only thing that could prevent them from having a real chance to do it is, injuries. Because, again, they won 32 times last year, and most of the important pieces from that team, they're all back. And so is Michigan State obvious and undeniable, and there's just no way I could envision them not winning the championship type favorite? No. But if I got to pick one team, that's the team I feel safest picking.
We're going to make you both pick one player as well, and since both of you picked Michigan State, I'm guessing that your player of the year is going to be Cassius Winston. Let's start with Gary.
It is Cassius Winston, but remember, this time last year, literally nobody thought Zion Williamson would be the player of the year or the #1 pick in the NBA draft. You couldn't find a single person predicting any of those things heading into the season. But then the Champions Classic happened, the Maui Invitational happened, and before we hit December, Zion was looking like the National Player of the Year, looking like the #1 pick in the draft, and he obviously became both of those things. So yes, in advance of everything getting started, I think Cassius Winston is the smart and safe and right choice. But this is college basketball, and storylines every single year emerge when we didn't anticipate them. Nobody thought Adam Morrison would be the phenomenon he was until he became that. Nobody thought Trae Young would be the phenomenon that he was until he became that. Perhaps this will be a season that provides a storyline like that.
I, too, have Cassius Winston, best player on the best team, so valuable, so multifaceted, set up for what can be a truly memorable season in college basketball. But I will just quickly throw out, by the way, that Seton Hall's Miles Powell and North Carolina's Cole Anthony stand to be stat monsters this season. And so if Cole Anthony can get North Carolina into position where it's competing with Cassius Winston and Michigan State on the one line, and Seton Hall goes on to have its best regular season in 2.5 decades there, if they put up huge numbers, those are a couple of guys to keep an eye on that can compete with Cassius Winston for National Player of the Year. But as we head in, it's got to be him. And he's got such a fun to watch old school game. He'll dominate you despite not being the biggest or fastest player on the floor. But in almost every single case, he is the smartest. So yes, Cassius Winston, National Player of the Year for Sparty.
All right, both Matt and Gary going with Cassius Winston and Michigan State to do it this season, 20 years after Mateen Cleaves and that Michigan State team did it back in Y2K. Fellas, thank you so much. If you like what you heard here, download and subscribe to the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Those two and our other college basketball minds dropping new episodes almost on the daily as we get ready for college hoops season.